Hello, and welcome to Vendor Trash. Is the title a reference to my opinions, my drawing skills, or both? That is for you to decide.
Slowly, but surely, we're making our way through every expansion's zones, and this week, we'll be focusing on those of Warlords of Draenor. Blizz really wanted to sell this world as #savage, and they did a pretty good job of it. I'll also say that, on average, Draenor zones are some of the most appealing in the entire game. It's probably in my top 3 expansions in that regard. I'm not sure what it is they did that give Draenor such a unique vibe. The geography hits a really good balance, or perhaps synthesis, of simple design and high fidelity. And though we may only have 8 of them to speak of, there's no shortage of enjoyment to be had out of them. With the exception of one, they're all part of one contiguous continent, though even that outlier is at least an island you can swim or fly to. Draenor also had the interesting task of needing to replicate the general layout of Outland, which I think it managed to do quite well without feeling overly derivative. Zanger Marsh being the Zanger Sea makes perfect sense. Blade's Edge Mountains essentially being the result of Frostfire Ridge and Gorgrond being smushed into each other by the destruction of the planet is a bit more of a stretch, but I'm willing to buy it. I mean, the planet blowing up is going to have some weird consequences. But without further ado, let's get into it. We're kicking things off with the initial Alliance zone of Shadowmoon Valley, and I have to say, it's a massive shame that the Horde and Alliance had fairly minimal reason to visit each other's first zones. I mean, there was the Apexis Crystal dailies, but not much beyond that, because Shadowmoon is just a very gorgeous place to be in. This isn't a video about garrisons, but Lunarfall is just leaps and bounds better than Frostwall was. Anyway, Blizzard had a lot of freedom when designing this zone, because the Outland version was so obviously distorted by the Fel, with even its centerpiece, the Hand of Gul'dan, being something that was explicitly raised up, they could do pretty much whatever they want for the pristine version. The only thing they really needed to preserve was the Temple of Karabor, which they did phenomenally, and I just have to voice, again, how much of a tragedy it is that we never got it as a capital city. So what did they do with their blank canvas? They painted this gorgeous valley stuck in perpetual nighttime. But like a well-lit nighttime because you need to see everything. The skybox helps convey this as it is positively rich with stars and a particularly clear view of Draenor's moons. The grass here is a nice cool green with many of the trees matching, though the standout trees are definitely the blue and lavender willow trees that absolutely pop, particularly that massive one at Moonwillow Peak. The rolling hills and marshy areas aren't all on offer here though. We do get some nice open sections to stretch our limbs out in too, particularly just outside of Karabor. And, by the way, the Dranic buildings all feel right at home here. They aren't the only ones at home though, as the Shadowmoon orcs have a significant presence too. The hulking stone slabs that make up their burial grounds are very easy to spot and to remember. But if you're anywhere out in nature or in the Draenei settlements, this is easily one of the most serene zones in the game, one of my favorite of Draenor, and one that I really wish I'd have had more reason to spend time in during WoD itself. Now then, I've made no secret of the fact that I don't usually care for winter or Arctic zones. I of course still want them to be around in reasonable quantities, but ultimately don't enjoy my time in them as much as most other zones. I blame this mostly on simply living in an area that has miserably long and miserably cold winters already. Knowing that, it may have surprised you to see me drawing Frostfire Ridge, which of course means that it's my favorite Draenor zone. Honestly, if you had asked me during WoD, I wouldn't have thought it was because of all the time I spent in the Frostwall garrison, which, by the way, doesn't really take advantage of any of the broader zone's strong points. But years removed from that experience, Frostfire absolutely slaps. It's one of the zones that best epitomizes the simple concept, high fidelity mantra I mentioned earlier. There are a lot of sweeping white and black vistas. Heck, just about the only color to diversify it is the orange from the lava. But that white snow looks smooth, and that black rock looks crisp. That basic color juxtaposition does a lot for the place, and you know what other contrast does? The coldness of the snowy dunes, and the heat of the volcanic areas. I still think Frostfire Ridge would be my favorite snow-heavy zone even without the fire part, but it really does a lot to alleviate my normal disdain for such zones. The one good part of a frozen wasteland is warming up next to the fire, or next to the liquid hot magma. Thankfully, we've got such areas all over the place, particularly the Bleeding Mountain in the east. Just not in the garrison for some inane reason. Oh, and Frostfire also includes some of the best flurry animations in the game, particularly near various surfaces. You can really feel the cold cutting straight to the bone. It's not a pleasant feeling, but it is an authentic one. What else is there to say? The giant Grond corpses are neat, Bladespire Citadel and its huge bridge are an amazing landmark, and I'll never forgive Blizz for abandoning it as a capital. Oh, and probably the biggest outlier subzone, the Bones of Agurak, is located to the far east as sort of a transition into Gorgrond. It abandons the snow and feels more like a tar pit, which is kind of neat. You know, there's really so much to love about Gorgrond. I mean, it's the home of my favorite mount, and it's got that random island with chairs that teleport you to the Timeless Isle for some reason. It's basically the Blade's Edge of Draenor, but done a billion times better. And there's the Laughing Skull Village that serves absolutely no purpose in the north. But no, the main appeal to the place, for me, is my usual affinity for wide, dusty, desert-like zones. I credit this to nostalgia for my days leveling in the Horde Kalimdor zones back in vanilla, though perhaps there's more at work here than I realize. It's a simple concept, but the execution here is just so good. There are also geysers and hot springs all over the place, a more tame manifestation of the volcanic presence below Frostfire Ridge. Aside from the more acidic and caustic looking areas, this helps you feel cozier still, though I do realize geyser fields are actually absurdly dangerous in real life. Oh, and there's everything surrounding Blackrock Foundry. As a dungeon and raid hub, it's one of the best such concepts in the game. Aside from the foundry itself, you have the docks to the north and the train depot, which unfortunately doesn't make a ton of sense with the overworld. As I'm sure many are aware, Gorgrond underwent heavy redesigns in Alpha, with older versions having a more sprawling network of train tracks that would make Grimrail a bit more logical. I do think it's a bit of a shame we lost some of that, especially as I care a whole lot less about the jungle stuff than the Dust Bowl stuff. Which, yeah, I hadn't really talked about that entire half of the zone yet, have I? Gorgrond ultimately wound up with a primal versus breaker motif, the rampant overgrowth of plant life versus the blunt, dusty, Grond-like forces that stems back to the spore mounds and Grond who's created to combat them. Look, I may enjoy the Botani and Genesaur a whole lot less than the Grond, but I don't think they actually hurt the design at all. A zone is allowed to have two dominant themes, and the greenery does make a decent complement. Probably the most outlier subzone would be the Crimson Fen, where mushrooms from the sea are encroaching on the land, these being of a particularly vibrant red hue. For a long time, I regarded Talador as my favorite WoD zone, and it's still probably my second favorite. It's breathtaking, it's where I wanted my garrison, and still would be if I had to choose today. It has some of the best music in the game that I'll always remember as the outro music of Haven's videos, may he rest in peace. Honestly, it's entirely possible that the only reason it fell below Frostfire in my mind is out of a desire not to overpopulate this video series with serene autumnal forest zones. Spoilers for the Legion video. Because it is quite reminiscent of both Eversong Woods and Suramar. Anyway, Talador is Draenor's equivalent to Terokkar Forest, and man, what a glow up. The grass is pretty, the trees are stunningly gorgeous while feeling entirely unique. Part of that is the twisted trunks they all seem to possess, and part of that is the vibrant red and orange leafage they have up top. Honestly, they feel like a more serious take on the Lorax's Truffula trees. The water in this zone has a lovely placidness to it, but aside from the geography, we also have all of the Dranic elements, because this is a zone primarily populated by the Draenei. I find their bulky yet elegant architecture with pink and blue highlights to be the perfect complement to the more rustic colorations already present in Talador's nature. Their bridges are so quaint and idyllic. Although we cannot enter the central dome as it was originally going to be the location of a raid, Shattrath City is absolutely sprawling in this version. Were it not filled to the brim with hostile orcs and demons, it might be a nice place to explore. We also have Auchendoon, which is much prettier than the blasted Outland version, even if it only offers up one dungeon instead of 4. Speaking of Terokkar, it and Talador are possibly the easiest analogs to make direct geographical comparisons between, with many of the differences being down to sheer scale. I mean, look at how well these maps overlap. There's just so much to love about this forest that I'm still mad I couldn't have spent my 2 years of sending followers out on gold missions while in this zone instead. And perhaps, coincidentally, Talador also has a pretty divergent subzone in the form of Zangara, a very mushroom-heavy little area where Khadgar chose to set up his tower, in which we mostly visited while making progress on our legendary rings. Spires of Arak pretty comfortably holds the honor of my least favorite WoD zone. That isn't to say it's bad. One thing I've learned over the course of this series is that I can appreciate the beauty of dang near any location in the game, but I really don't enjoy being here nearly as much as the other zones on this continent. for many of the same reasons that I ranked Skyreach at the bottom of my WoD dungeon rankings. It feels dry, it feels gross, and the Erekos storyline is so separated from everything else that it's hard to remember it accurately. On that note of it feeling dry, I feel like they took a normal looking zone and dragged the saturation bar way to the left. There's no vibrancy here, which perhaps lines up with the fairly dismal storyline I think it had, but it's not doing it any favors otherwise. Spires is in many ways sort of unique to Draenor, though not entirely. It's essentially the Skedis subzone of Terrakar, but much bigger. We can probably just assume that most of the zone broke off when the planet went boom. The eponymous spires certainly are striking, but the way in which they're shaped means they mostly act as an impediment to exploration than an avenue for it. You mostly just have to go around them instead of up. And the forests between them don't provide much visual appeal, yet have such thick coverage that they make the subzones hard to distinguish. Also, the zone feels like the most disjointed of Draenor, being so far south and with no reason to ever go further than Skyreach and Rukmar once you're max level. Oh, and again, we have a bit of an outlier subzone with Sethic Hollow, where Seth's cursed blood fell and corrupted the land. It's here that the outcasts of Arakoa society are devolved, and yeah, the area certainly looks bloody and fetid. The Draenor version of Nagrand is really difficult to evaluate objectively, because on the plus side, it's Nagrand, but like HD. The grass doesn't hurt your eyes to look at in this version. Yet, at the same time, they had to remove a lot of the magical elements that made the original Nagrand so memorable, both for lore reasons and to keep them distinct. Most obvious among these would be the floating islands, of course, but also stuff like the alien skybox. So we're in this weird situation where it's objectively better looking than the Outland version, but also just less cool. As part of them buffing up the zone's square footage, they added a lot more forested areas, particularly in the south and west. Though, it'd be disingenuous to imply they did away with the sweeping open plains that we would have expected. There is a bit of a swampy area just south of Highmaul as well. Speaking of Highmaul, there is a much broader and stronger presence of ogres here, and their vaguely Grecian architecture. It can be fun flying around the open world version of the raid, though I was a bit shocked when I realized just how far the teleporter in the raid actually took you. I'd always assumed you were just going upstairs of the same building. Perhaps, if I'd had a reason to go to Nagrand after the first 3 months of the expansion, I'd have become more endeared to it, because it really is a very scenic set of plains and forests that goes underappreciated. I think it would have benefited massively from being its own thing, but it was ultimately cursed to be compared to its Outland equivalent. And whereas Draenor's Shadowmoon Valley sort of superseded Outlands in the player base's mind as the default, this Nagrand ultimately could not manage the same feat. For some reason, Blizzard didn't really learn their lesson with Tol Barad and tried their hand yet again to recreate Wintergrasp with an open world PvP zone, and that's how we got Ashran. Except I think you, from the get-go, had to queue into it, so like, what's even the point of it being open world? I mean, eventually it was turned into an epic battleground, and you can now just roam around the open world version at any time without danger, but it's completely unpopulated and with nothing to do. And since I'm more concerned with the zone itself than the battleground, that leaves me with fairly little to talk about. I actually do really like the look of the place. It's like someone took the color palette of Spires of Arak and turned the saturation back up to something appealing. On that note, I will briefly comment that I liked the geographic feel of Warspear and Stormshield, but they were still disappointing overall because they were just glorified faction camps and they robbed us of something greater. But yeah, the zone straight up looks good. I would have loved having actual quests and whatnot to do here. The ruins all over the place are mostly those of the Ashmaul Ogre clan, and they're satisfying in a very big, chonky way. And you've got a decent variety of subzones, including the Dark Woods and the Molten Quarry. There was also a very lengthy underground section that got patched in that pretty much nobody ever bothered with, but hey, there's an Apex's vault there, and the tunnels serve as a backdoor route across the battleground if you don't mind not being mounted. Also, as an interesting aside, in the main universe, Deathwing used Ashran as his base when he relocated to Outland. Neat. Dude has like 50 hideouts by now though. Ultimately, I can only give Ashran so much credit as it is a pretty small zone that serves minimal purpose in the open world, but I still like it for how it looks. Next, we have Tanan Jungle, the equivalent to Hellfire Peninsula and the only patch zone we received during WoD. It's by no means one of my favorites, but I can't say that I dislike it either. The concept is simple, a gloomy jungle that has been overrun by the Fel. And I do believe that the subzones that are mostly jungle are actually quite nice to look at and exist within. The area surrounding the faction hub is probably my favorite due to that. The more fell-heavy areas add very vibrant green to the cooler, darker green of the jungle itself, which feels a bit much a lot of the time. But I've oversimplified matters because the Iron Horde has also left large swaths of Tanaan trodden over and built up with ramparts and minor industry, which means we get some parts that manage to combine the rough browns of dead trees and crates, dull grays of ramparts and machinery, and the blaring green of the fell. Truly an exhausting combination to behold. We do get a decent variety of subzones though, including the very spiky Zethgal, the Draenei's Temple of Shannara, the withered Zora Marsh, the savage Fangrelah, the ruined Dark Portal, the Throne of Kil'jaeden, and a harbor, among others. Notably, in the middle of the jungle, we have Hellfire Citadel, which, just like the Outland version, is far, far bigger on the inside than the outside. Speaking of Hellfire Peninsula, the two maps actually do line up surprisingly well. Kudos on that. Oh, and it's a minor detail, but the Fell Sludge is a fun element. Each stack increases your damage done and damage taken. For the sake of expediency, you want to operate at higher stacks, but the debuff lasts 30 minutes, and if you hit 10 stacks, you instantly die, so you have to be careful not to accidentally clip it while at 9 stacks. It was kind of a fun risk-reward element. So, ultimately, Tanaan, while visually impressive and actually nice in parts, is also borderline hideous in others, which it's supposed to be, obviously, given the context, but it does restrict my enjoyment a bit. It's probably my second or third least favorite WoD zone, but that still leaves it as a pretty average zone across WoW as a whole. And lastly, that brings us to the island of Farallon, Draenor's analog of Outland's Netherstorm. Its environment is naturally reminiscent of that found in the latter's ecodomes, as they were designed to restore the... Blizz rather infamously never managed to deliver on this zone that they had referenced at numerous points. It's undoubtedly the result of many cuts made to WoD, both as a result of garrisons hogging resources and the decision to abandon development to focus more on Legion. It's a real shame, and though it feels super duper random, especially with what BFA did to the Draenorverse, I wouldn't mind getting to go there at one point for a patch. At least we got a funny line from Yrel and HOTS about it. And that's everything. I really love Draenor. The continent has a lot of beauty to it because it mostly stuck to very strong design philosophies. Or at least, I suspect that's what happened. And I think not being able to fly until halfway through the expansion enriched my attachment to these lands. But that's a phenomenon to be discussed in another video. Of course, this week's drawing had to be Frostfire Ridge, and though there were many specific locales I could have chosen, I decided to go with Bladespire Citadel, since when I drew Shadowmoon Valley in an earlier video, I drew the Temple of Karabor. And, I'm just bitter about how these places were wasted. Like, there were even really obvious areas where you could stick profession trainers and the like. I also really like that there's a back entrance to the Citadel that most people probably forget is there, which is understandable given the awesome bridge that you normally take to get to it, or the kind of cool ramp to the side. Anyway, I'm mostly satisfied with how the drawing turned out. These landscape ones do tend to get a bit wonky if I zoom out too far, but I suppose this one only required me to zoom out a moderate distance. And I like how the skyline turned out and the snow effect in the foreground. So congratulations, Frostfire Ridge, you're the only winter zone that's going to win any of these videos. That's all I have to say for now though, so join me in 12 weeks where we will cover the zones of Legion.
Thank you for watching, and I will catch you next week. Bye bye.